So gerrymandering is the definition is the manipulation of electoral district boundaries to advantage one party by diluting the voting power of the opposition, right? And when you do that, your congressional maps get really weird looking. And so here's an example, right? This is North Carolina's congressional map, and you're thinking like, what's going on there? Like, why is it like that? Because they're looking at population, they look at like where they think people are going to vote, and they're just like, hey, if we can split people up so they're not like a majority, we can actually like make their voices and their voting power a lot less. So they do this, and it's like it's really funny, right? It was named after Elbridge Gerry, former vice president of the United States, but back in 1812, he was the governor of Massachusetts, and he signed a bill that created a partisan district in Massachusetts. So he was like the founder. He's not the founder. Like, he kind of started it in a sense. Now, the really funny thing is this. Gary didn't like this practice. He thought it was wrong, but he still voted for it, and he still signed it because his party did that. And so he got it named after him. And you're like, well, why is it gerrymandering, right? Because that Massachusetts district, the newspapers felt like it looked like the spots on a salamander, so they stuck his name and the word salamander and then made it a verb, right? Really clever. Now here's the funny thing. So gerrymandered is named after him, who doesn't even agree with it, and they got his name wrong, right? His name is Elbridge Gerry, but we say gerrymandering. It's just how life works, right? Now, normally the way this works is states will redistrict, they'll redraw their maps every 10 years after the census, because the idea is that, hey, people have moved around, and so we want to give like good representation, be like, okay, well, a lot of people moved out of this area, so we got to adjust the things so people can be represented. But right now, Texas is taking the extraordinary measure of actually redistricting at the 5-year mark. So it should be like when the year is 0 at the end, right, every 10 years. They're redistricting now so they can gain 5 additional seats in the House of Representatives, right? And so when they're going to do this. They just voted in. It's like literally happening right now, right? So then California, right, because Texas is a red state, so like, oh, you're gonna gain 5 seats for the Republicans. Texas is like, well, we're a blue state. We're gonna do the same thing, right? And so California just passed a ballot measure, so because they can't just, Texas can just like change the stuff, right? That's how they work. California says we're gonna vote on it, so they're gonna vote on these new maps. No, they're gonna vote that to allow California to redo these maps now, so they can gain 5 more seats for the Democrats, right? And Florida is like, whoa. If you're going to do this, we got to start thinking about this too. And so Florida's thinking about it now, and so is Illinois and Maryland. Do you see where this goes, right? This gerrymandering is clearly unethical. It's not. Nobody tries to say, no. This is good for democracy. Nobody tries to do this, right? Oh, this map here. This is just a map of like how this independent organization kind of like grades each state by like how well they're doing, right? So it's all over, right? Where some states are doing a pretty good job, other states, not so well, right? And so the majority of Americans don't like this, right? Because no one is trying to say this is a good thing. And yet, for 200 plus years, our leaders have not been able to get rid of it. Nobody thinks it's a good thing, and yet we just keep it 200 years later, right? And why? Well, it's because everybody wants this in their toolbox, right? When they're in power, they want to be able to do this, even though both sides, everybody is like, no, this is not a good thing for democracy. And so at the core, this is a failure of leadership, right? For 200 years, our leaders have not been able to do the right thing, which is, like fair representation, which is kind of what democracy is about, right? Because of this need to gain power, right? And so today we're starting the book of Nehemiah, and the theme here is biblical leadership. Right? We don't see a lot of biblical leadership in our world, so we want to take a look at Nehemiah and see, okay, what does it mean? Like, what is a leader that honors the Lord? Like, what does that look like? And so we're in chapters 1 to 6 right now, and we're going to jump in. Okay, so before we kind of go into each chapter, just the background, because it's a new book, the background of Nehemiah, okay, some timelines, okay? Israel falls, that's the northern kingdom, in around 720 BC from the Assyrians, and then Judah, the southern kingdom, they fall at around 586 BC to the Babylonians, right? And so a lot of the prominent, well, most of the prominent people get deported and exiled, and so they're in Babylon, and eventually they get a chance to return. And so the first return, it comes in 3 waves, right? First return is under Zerubbabel, and that is in 536 BC, about 50 years later. So about 50 years after they're all exiled and deported, some of them get a chance to return. And it takes about 20 years for them to rebuild the temple, because the temple was destroyed when the Babylonians came and when Judah fell. Okay, and then a second wave was under Ezra, and that was about 456 BC. We were just in the book of Ezra. Now we are in the book of Nehemiah, and that is the third and final wave, right? And so Nehemiah returns, and that is in 444 BC, around there. And so you can see in between the first and the second one is quite a long time, and then between the second and third is a shorter time. Okay, Nehemiah, they call him, he is a cupbearer to King Artaxerxes. And we don't really have that job now, but you're like, cupbearer, like, you're just some guy who, like, has his cup. It's actually a really important role, and so you want to look at him like a close administrator to the king, right? So his position is pretty high, and so he's not just some guy who, like, holds a cup, stands there, like, all day, like, do you want your Coke? Okay, I'm gonna go get it, right? No, he's a fairly high level official. He's an administrator. Okay, all right. So chapters 1 to 6. Let's jump in, and then let's take a look at what it means for us today, because a lot of this stuff is like, okay, I get it for them, but what does it mean for us today? Okay, so chapter 1. Okay, Nehemiah is in the city of Susa, which is actually a World Heritage Site now. It's in Iran. Right, so you can go there, and actually, Iran is a little bit unstable right now, so I'm not sure how easy it is to get there. But if in different times you get a chance to go, you can go visit where Nehemiah was. And so Nehemiah learns that the walls of Jerusalem are still broken. Right, so he's working, but he's got family, and they're like, some of them have returned to Jerusalem, and some of them then come back to Susa, and he finds out that the walls are still broken, and he is in despair. He is just like, it like blows his mind. Why? Because it's been about 100 years since that first return, right? So this is not an issue of, oh yeah, like some buddies of mine went back like last year. Oh, they haven't built the wall yet? Oh no. 100 years ago, the first set of Jews went back to Jerusalem. So that's a long time. Think about this. Nehemiah was born in Babylon. He wasn't one of the exiles, right? And so here's the guy who was raised in exile, and as far as he's concerned, that a long time ago his people had already gone back to Jerusalem, that the temple has been rebuilt. So he's like thinking, yeah, it's great. Yeah, I'm not there, but my people in our city, in our temple, everything's going well. And the shock to find out, no, the city walls aren't even rebuilt. And of course, we're wondering, what's the big deal? It's city walls, right? For us, it's not a big deal because we don't really deal with that stuff anymore. But back then, the city walls like really is a symbol of a city that's like established and protected, right? Walls today, like with modern like militaries, walls can't really like stop anything. So it's kind of silly to build big giant walls. But back then, those walls are a big deal. Okay, and so this is a big deal. And so chapter 1 is Nehemiah's prayer, because he goes before the Lord and just like God, how did this happen? And he pours his heart out in this prayer. So that's chapter 1, and that's what we read earlier. Okay, Chris just read that. Right? Chapter 2 is when he returns. And now here's the really incredible thing. So Artaxerxes is the king. He is not a worshiper of the Lord. And yet, when he finds out that Nehemiah is just really upset, instead of saying, "How dare you be upset in my presence? You're killing this vibe off with your head," which is a normal thing back then. He cared, like Artaxerxes cares enough for Nehemiah to find out what is troubling you so much, and Nehemiah tells him, like, my people's city, the walls haven't even been built. It's been over 100 years. And incredibly, and I say incredibly, this is God working in incredible ways. God working through a king that doesn't even worship him. Incredibly, Artaxerxes shows favor to Nehemiah and allows him to go back and rebuild the walls. And what's nuts is this. It's not a quick trip. It takes 12 years. So if you think about it in modern terminology, it's like your boss giving you PTO of 12 years to do this thing for your people. Right? PTO for students, that stands for paid time off. That's really important when you guys get jobs, because it's not just about your salary, it's also about your benefits as well. And so if you get no PTO, that means you get no vacation time. Okay? So 12 years PTO to go back to build these walls. And so that's God working. Okay? And so Nehemiah in chapter 2 returns, but what he does is really interesting, right? He's basically appointed the governor. And yet he returns and he secretly inspects the walls. He doesn't come back with huge fanfare. And let me read verses 11 to 13. It says this: I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. By night I went out, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Right? And so he goes and examines the walls. He's done it in secret. He's not making a big deal out of it. Then, after he does this, he reveals himself to the Jewish officials who are there, and they start rebuilding. Let me read verse 17 to 18. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. They replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. Okay, and so Nehemiah comes back. He reveals himself to the Jewish officials, and they're like, okay, this is a good idea, because Nehemiah is not just coming back by himself. He's got the king's blessing. He's got the king's resources to do this. Now, there are also other officials in the land, right? Because remember, when the Jewish people were exiled, different people groups have come in. Babylon had sent their own people in, and so it's a real mix of stuff. And so other local officials named, three of them named Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, they opposed the work, right? And you're like, oh, wait, we've talked about this. Yes, there's always opposition, right? There's opposition in Ezra, there's opposition now. There's always going to be opposition when we are doing God's work. And so that happens at the end of chapter 2. Chapter 3 is really just a chapter about the progress and who's doing what, right? So if you can think about it, it's just like, hey, we did this guy did this. This guy was in charge of this, he did that. It's like a little update, okay? Chapter 4 goes into that opposition a little bit more, okay? And so the opposition starts with mockery, right? It starts with just those officials looking at this wall and thinking like, this wall is like up to my thigh. Like if we were to invade, I would just step over it. Ah ha 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 ha, right? Oh, they're hilarious, right? But as the building continues, those officials start to realize, oh, there's something here. And so then they start to actually attack the Jewish people who are building the walls, right? And this leads to Nehemiah and the people having to not just build the walls, but build and have all their weapons at ready to defend as well, okay? And if for some of you who are like really interested in military stuff, you might be thinking, wait a minute, like if an army were attacking a bunch of builders who just had like swords on their side, I don't think those people can defend it well. You have to understand, like, these officials are also under the rule of the Babylonians, right? And so this is like a situation um, where it's like it's not like one country attacking this is like inner fighting. So it's not like this giant army, but it's just you have these people groups and tribes, and they're attacking each other, right? So they were able to defend off attacks, but they had to deal with this, okay? And let me read verse 16 to 18 in chapter 4. So from that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor. The officers posted themselves behind all the people of Judah who were building the wall. Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other. And each of the builders wore his sword at his side as he worked. Right? And so they are just ready. They're doing the work of rebuilding the walls, but they're just ready to defend against attack as well. And this just, when sometimes we think when we are like obeying the Lord, doing his will, all that kind of stuff, that things just will go easy. That's just not true, right? Sometimes things get a lot harder. They had to pull double duty, not just doing the work, but also defending. Okay, so that's really important to know, because sometimes we get really frustrated that as we try to obey God and as we try to live for him, things like get harder. That's very common. That's almost normal. Okay, so don't worry about that. Our role is to be faithful and to be obedient, but God is still there. But sometimes it does get more difficult. And then we get to chapter 5, all right? Chapter 5, we go away from the work of rebuilding a little bit, because as this is happening, right, as like the main storyline is like, there's this rebuilding, it's great, it's like slowly but surely the wall's getting higher and higher, it's getting stronger, the gaps between the walls as they're building are being filled. It's like, this is great. But as this is happening, Nehemiah learns of a lot of economic hardship and oppression among the Israelites, right? And so this is not something that is like something illegal being done. This is all just normal stuff that is happening that is perfectly allowed, right? It's just when the wealthy take advantage of a situation, okay? Right? So there's a famine in the land, and people get taxed, right? When you have this combination, the poor become a lot more vulnerable. And so they complain. They're like, look, there's this famine, we're getting taxed, and the wealthy, who are in charge, like, they're really taking advantage of us. And you think, wait a minute, oh wow, that sounds familiar, huh? Yeah, that still happens today. This is like human sinful nature, right? Like, this happens. And so Nehemiah, what's not normal is Nehemiah steps in and puts a stop to this. That's what's unusual here, because past kings and past Israelite leaders, they usually ignored this stuff, right? Because you always ignore the poor. What power do they have, right? They can't. They just do their thing, right? People always ignore the poor because they don't have power or influence. And in the past, the leaders ignored it. In fact, a lot of the past kings actually participated in it and really oppressed the poor. But Nehemiah doesn't do this. And he actually puts a stop to this, which is like, Nehemiah, like, whoa, like, this never happens. It's great, okay? And now the funny thing is, not the funny thing, but like, this kind of stuff is one of the reasons why Israel and Judah fell to begin with. A lot of times we think, oh, why did Israel and Judah fall? Like, what was going on? And we always go to the first thing, which is true, right? Is that, oh, they turned away from the Lord and they started worshiping other gods. That is 100% absolutely true, okay? And so that was a reason why God eventually allowed the Assyrians and the Babylonians to take over. But another thing that we see over and over in the Old Testament is this theme of the Israelite people not taking care of each other, oppressing each other, their leaders not taking care of the vulnerable, right? And so what we see here, which is ironic is that the Israelites are trying to rebuild. They rebuilt the temple already. Now they're trying to rebuild the wall. They're trying to rebuild their nation. And they're doing the same thing that got them here in the first place. So they really haven't learned anything. And so Nehemiah hears of this, people complain, and he puts a stop to this. Right? And then we also find out in chapter 5 that Nehemiah doesn't like take a high salary. It's not literally a salary, but like he doesn't take a high salary that previous governors who have been sent back do, right? And he has the legal right to do this, but he just doesn't do it. And so I'm going to read verse 18 and 19 in chapter 5. It says this. He says, I never demanded the food allotted to the governor because the demands were heavy on these people. Remember me with favor, my God, for all I have done for these people, right? And so Nehemiah had the right as his position, right? He's like, I'm the governor, right? This is what I'm allowed to take for myself because of the position I am, but he doesn't. He looks at the people and realizes, wow, there's a famine going on. There's a lot of hardships, so he himself does not take what is, in a sense, rightfully his, right? In a legal sense. And what he does instead, and this is what I love, he says in this last in 19, remember me with favor, my God, for all I have done for these people. He basically leaves it in God's hands. He basically says, God, sure, it'll be nice to get paid a little bit more, right? Sure, it'll be nice to take the food allotted, but no, these people are struggling, so I'm not going to. And God, my well-being, right? I don't think Nehemiah looks at this as a career, but in a sense, like my career, I'm going to let you take care of that. And I think that is such a different way of going about life than we do. Even when I say we, as in like Christians. Because even Christians, we typically think, okay, you know what? I want to get mine, right? Like I'm going to work hard, and I'm going to get what's owed to me because I am a superstar employee. Or I'm like a great entrepreneur, and I create my own company. I'm going to get mine. After that, I'm going to say, what do I have? How has God blessed me? Let me go and see how I can be generous or whatever, right? It's always, I'm going to take care of myself first. And then with whatever extra I have, I want to, do God's work and bless people, right? And here Nehemiah doesn't do that, right? He takes care of the people and then says, God, like my life is in your hands. Right? And I love that about him. And so then we get to chapter 6. Chapter 6, the opposition continues, and the officials, the three officials, actually try a plot to assassinate Nehemiah. It doesn't work. He's not intimidated, and eventually the wall is complete. And when the wall is complete, a lot of the opposition stops, right? In verse 16 it says, when all our enemies heard about this, that's the completion of the wall, all the surrounding nations were afraid and lost their confidence because they realized that this work had been done with the help of our God. Right? And so the walls are complete, and they realize, oh, God was in this the whole time. And when they realize that, they back away because they're afraid. And so that is what's happening in chapters 1 to 6. What does this have to do? What does this say about biblical leadership for us? Okay, today, we typically, when we choose our leaders, or we think about like, what kind of leader do I want? And I say not just we as everybody, but also Christians, we're not immune to this, right? We typically think of leaders who are smart. We want leaders who are smart. We want leaders who are charismatic, right? They have that presence about them that makes us just want to follow them. We want leaders who are strong and powerful and a fighter, right? We don't see these characteristics in biblical leadership, right? But that's typically what we want. And so that's why I think this is so important, because the way Nehemiah is compared to how we typically think about leaders and that kind of stuff, very different, okay? And so we want to take a look at, okay, what do we get from this, and how do we as people, A, be biblical leaders, because all of us are going to at some point like be in a situation where we're leading, right? Whether it's in your job or your family as a parent, right, or whatever. Like you're probably going to be in a situation where you're going to have to lead something, okay? And so how do we get there? And also, how do we think about choosing leaders, right? Whether you might be in a situation where you might have to hire somebody, where you might, or in a church where you're on a search committee where you have to like bring in a pastor. Or whatever. These are all important because a leader's power, both good and bad, really depend on their ability to like get people to follow them, right? And so if we can like understand, okay, this is the biblical leaders I'm looking for, and like choose that actually makes a big difference as well, okay? And so it's important across the board, right? So I have 3 points. There's actually there's a ton of leadership principles from Nehemiah we can do. I just chosen 3, just because if I like give you like 10, nobody like you get nothing out of it, right? If you get 3, maybe you get like half, right? So that's good, right? Now, all right. So the first one is this: biblical leaders are people of prayer. In chapter 1, verse 4, it says, "When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven." Right? Biblical leaders are people of prayer. That's like the most important thing. That's the thing that is so easy for us to skip, right? Especially when things get difficult. It's so easy for us to be like, oh man, I'm in a tough situation. I gotta make a decision. Okay, let's write down pros and cons. Let's get our data and let's analyze the data. ChatGPT, I've uploaded the data. What should I do? Right? But instead, what we should do is we need to be in prayer, because our wisdom is from the Lord, not from ourselves. Right? And so that's the first thing. It's like biblical leaders are people of prayer. When things get tough, we pray. When things are easy, we pray. Like that needs to be just a part of our DNA and who we are. And it's like the easiest thing to skip and forget. So I just want to point that out and remind us as our first point. The second thing is this: biblical leaders care and empathize. Right? The language in chapter 2 kind of shifts a little bit. And it shifts to we, not like I for Nehemiah. It shifts to we, right? Because for him, and this is important, it's not about what they do. A biblical leader doesn't think about, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. It's about we. How are we doing, right? Because they care. And I think this is really important because there's a trend today that is shifting away from empathy. In fact, there's a trend today now that's growing that looks at empathy as a negative. I don't know if you remember, or this is one of those things, Elon Musk had this quote that kind of became big, and he basically said that one of the fundamental problems with Western civilization is empathy, right? And of course you're like, I don't follow Elon Musk, right? No, we don't, right? But he's very influential, and I also see this among Christians as well. So like this kind of stuff is not just like, oh, out there. It gets everywhere, right? So even among the church, there's this idea of like, oh, empathy is maybe not a great thing, okay? And the thing that I want to point out, that because I'm hoping that you're sitting there and you're like, Gene, that's the craziest thing that I heard you say, that people think empathy is a bad thing. I hope that you don't believe that, and I hope that hasn't come into your worldview, but it's out there. And I want to remind you that Jesus literally came to earth to become a human being so he can empathize with us. Obviously, he did much more than that, right? He died for our sins on the cross, that kind of stuff. But like one of the reasons why Jesus became a human being is so that we can know God by looking at the person of Jesus, and that God, so we can say like God understands us. He literally gave up his power. He gave up his throne to be a human so he can empathize with us. And if that's what Jesus did, biblical leaders, well, all people, right? Biblical leaders especially, should be people who care and empathize. Okay. And the third and final point is this. Biblical leaders keep it real, honest, and transparent. I'm going to read chapter 2, verse 17 and 18. This is when he meets with the local Jewish officials. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in? Jerusalem lies in ruins, and the gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king has said to me. Right? So a biblical leader is not going to try to, cover up things aren't going well. Like, no, everything's fine, and then things go horrible, right? Like, biblical leaders don't do that. Biblical leaders are real and honest with the people they lead, and they tell you what is happening. At the same time, they do not neglect the goodness and grace of God, right? I love that about Nehemiah, right? So he goes to the officials and just says, like, look at the situation we're in. He's not gonna try to sugarcoat. He says we are in a bad spot, right? He's honest with them, but then he also reminds them of God's grace and what God has done. And I think that's what biblical leadership is about, right? It's not about sugarcoating it. It's not about like, oh, the people can't handle the truth, right? It's about telling them the truth, being open and honest, but at the same time reminding them that God is so much bigger than any of our problems. And so biblical leadership is very rare today. You don't see it in the world. And it's important for us to be able to understand it a little bit. The reason why I chose these three and not like all the other ones I could have picked, they're also really good, is that if you just pause and think about it, can you imagine if we, within the church, were people who, when we're in position of leadership, we're people of prayer, we're people of empathy, and we care about each other, and people who are open and honest. That would be so crazy that it would be such a testament to Jesus. If you in your workplaces, or you in school, or wherever you are, if you can be a leader wherever you are, somebody who is prayerful, is empathetic, and who is open and honest in how you lead and how you work and how you whatever, oh my goodness, that would change so much. And if we are people who understand that, and those are the kinds of leaders we want in our churches and society, that would change everything too, right? So it's important on both ends. And so as I close, think about where God has placed you. Some of you are in positions of leadership, right? Your careers have gotten to the point where you are in positions there. Others are not. You might be young. You're like, I don't do any of that stuff. But think about one day, right? God will put you somewhere where you're going to have to lead. Maybe it's not a big, giant group. Maybe it's a small team of like 3 people. But it still matters. And if we can be people, biblical leaders in whatever sphere we're in, that is going to speak volumes to who Jesus is to the world. Let's pray.